February 1945, the Soviet Union. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, the heads of government of the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, meet at Yalta in Crimea to discuss the post-war reorganization of Germany and Europe. One of the key points of their meeting is that after the war is over, Nazi leaders will be found and prosecuted. In November 1945, the Tribunal of American, Soviet, British, and French judges and prosecutors in Nuremberg starts a trial of senior Nazis, accusing them of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, namely murder, extermination, enslavement, and the deportation of civilian populations. Less than a year later, on the 1st of October 1946, the verdicts are given, and 12 of the 22 defendants are sentenced to death by hanging. One of them is a man who, during the Second World War, was in charge of a program which involved deportation for slave labor of more than 12 million men, women, and children, many of them under terrible conditions of cruelty and suffering. His name is Fritz Sauckel. Ernst Friedrich Christoph Fritz Sauckel was born on the 27th of October, 1894 in the Bavarian town of Haßfurt, then part of the German Empire. Sauckel was of lower middle-class origin. His father was a post office employee and his mother was a seamstress. In 1909, at the age of 15, young Fritz left school without graduating and went to sea in the Norwegian, Swedish, and German merchant marine. The First World War began on the 28th of July 1914. While other German men were fighting and losing their lives on the battlefield, the 19-year-old Sauckel was captured when his German cargo ship was stopped in the English Channel on its way to Australia. For more than 5 years, from August 1914 until the 20th of October 1919, he was interned as an enemy alien in France. During this time, he studied mathematics, languages, and economics, and began to develop political views, in particular anti-Semitism. After the First World War ended with Germany's surrender on the 11th of November 1918, Sauckel initially lived in great poverty as an unskilled laborer and adopted radical views. He claimed that Jews were to blame for his situation, and that world Jewry was to be fought. He worked as an apprentice locksmith and toolmaker in the ball-bearing works, and in 1919 joined the German Nationalist Protection and Defiance Federation, which was the largest and the most active anti-Semitic federation in Germany after the First World War. Its members unilaterally rejected the democratic parliamentary system of interwar Germany, and many of them eventually joined the Nazi Party. Among them was Fritz Sauckel, who joined the party in January 1923 with membership number 1395. In the following year, he married Elisabeth Wetzel, with whom he had 10 children. Sauckel steadily rose up through the ranks of the Nazi Party in the state of Thuringia, where in 1927 he became a Gauleiter, or regional Nazi Party leader, and was a member of the Thuringian legislature from 1927 to 1933. Following the 31st of July 1932 Thuringia state election, the Nazis captured 42.5% of the votes and 26 seats, and Sauckel became the new leading Minister of State, as well as the Interior Minister, from which portfolio he controlled all the state police and security apparatus. Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party came into power on the 30th of January 1933. On the 5th of May of the same year, Sauckel was appointed to the new position of Reich Governor of Thuringia, the new post which was created to provide more centralized control over the state governments. Sauckel would retain this position until May 1945. On the 12th of November 1933, he became a member of the Reichstag, the German parliament. On the 9th of September 1934, at the invitation of Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS, Sauckel joined the SS as an SS Gruppenführer, which was equivalent to Major General. In 1936, Adolf Hitler initiated the Four-Year Plan, which was a series of economic measures in Nazi Germany, and its primary purpose was to provide for the rearmament of Germany and to prepare the country for self-sufficiency in 4 years, from 1936 to 1940. Aside from emphasizing the rebuilding of the nation's military defenses, in disregard of the restrictions imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles after the German defeat in World War I, the four-year plan sought to reduce unemployment, increase synthetic fiber production, undertake public works projects, increase automobile production, initiate numerous building and architectural projects, and further develop the Autobahn, or the highway system. Within the four-year plan office, Sauckel worked directly under Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, obtaining and allocating labor for German industry and agriculture. As early as 1937, the Nazis increasingly exploited the forced labor of so-called enemies of the state for economic gain and to meet desperate labor shortages, and by the end of the year, most Jewish males residing in Germany were required to perform forced labor for various government agencies. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The last operational Polish unit surrendered on the 6th of October the same year. The German invasion of France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands started on the 10th of May 1940 and became known as the Battle of France. Paris, the French capital, fell to the Germans on the 14th of June 1940. Germany's military campaigns created a huge manpower shortage in the German economy that Nazi authorities filled by conscripting foreign workers. On the 21st of March 1939, Hitler had appointed Sauckel general plenipotentiary for labor deployment, with authority to put under uniformed control the utilization of all available manpower, including that of workers recruited abroad and of prisoners of war. Sauckel was instructed to operate within the fabric of the four-year plan, and on the 27th of March 1942, the Reich Marshal Hermann Göring issued a decree as commissioner for the four-year plan, transferring his manpower sections to Sauckel. On the 30th of September 1942, Hitler gave Sauckel authority to appoint commissioners in the various occupied territories, and to take all necessary measures for the enforcement of the decree of the 21st of March 1942. Under the authority which he obtained by these decrees, Sauckel set up a program for the mobilization of the labor resources available to the Reich. One of the important parts of this mobilization was the systematic exploitation by force of the labor resources of the occupied territories. Shortly after Sauckel had taken office, he had the governing authorities in the various occupied territories issue decrees establishing compulsory labor service in Germany. Under the authority of these decrees, Sauckel's commissioners, backed up by the police authorities of the occupied territories, obtained and sent to Germany the laborers which were necessary to fill the quotas given to them by Sauckel. Voluntary numbers were insufficient, and forced civilian labor was introduced within a few months. That real voluntary recruiting was the exception rather than the rule is shown by Sauckel's statement on the 1st of March 1944, when he said, "Out of 5 million foreign workers who arrived in Germany, not even 200,000 came voluntarily." The majority of the acquired workers originated from the Eastern Territories, especially in Poland and the Soviet Union, where the methods used to gain workers were very harsh. The army was used to press gang local people, and most were taken by force to the Reich. In addition to forced civilian laborers, Sauckel authorized the use of prisoners of war. Conditions of work were extremely poor and discipline severe, especially for concentration camp prisoners. All of the latter were unpaid and provided with starvation rations, barely keeping those workers alive. Such slave labor was widely used in many German industries, including coal mining, steel making, and armaments manufacture. For prisoners, the ability to work often meant the potential to survive, and those deemed physically unable to work were often the first to be killed. The Nazis also pursued a conscious policy of annihilation through work, under which certain categories of prisoners were literally worked to death. In this policy, camp prisoners were forced to work under conditions that would directly and deliberately lead to illness, injury, and death. For example, at the Mauthausen concentration camp, emaciated prisoners were forced to run up 186 steps out of a stone quarry while carrying heavy boulders. The use of forced and slave labor continually increased throughout the war, especially after Albert Speer, the Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, in April 1942, brought about the formation of the Central Planning Board, which determined the labor requirements of industry, agriculture, and all other components of the German war economy, and requisitioned that labor through Sauckel's office. Sauckel had overall responsibility for the slave labor program, and he was constantly in the field supervising the steps which were being taken. He was aware of the ruthless methods being taken to obtain laborers, and vigorously supported them on the ground that they were necessary to fill the quotas. Sauckel's regulations also provided that he had responsibility for transporting the laborers to Germany, allocating them to employers and taking care of them, and that other agencies involved in these processes were subordinate to him. He was informed of the bad conditions which existed and said, "All the men must be fed, sheltered, and treated in such a way as to exploit them to the highest possible extent, at the lowest conceivable degree of expenditure." On one occasion, at a meeting of high party officials, he explained, "If we lose this war, not only will they hang me, but they will also hang you. This can be taken for granted." It has been estimated that over 12 million such laborers eventually were brought forcibly to Germany to work, often by brutal coercion. Millions of them died. At the peak of the slave labor program, the forced laborers constituted 20% of the German workforce. On the 1st of July 1944, following the division of the Prussian province of Saxony, Sauckel was named the Supreme President of the government district Erfurt, which became part of Thuringia. In the autumn of 1944, as Allied armies crossed the borders into Germany, the Nazi regime conscripted German youths under 16 to defend the Reich, alongside seniors over the age of 60, in the militia units of the Volkssturm, meaning People's Storm. Poorly equipped and inadequately trained, thousands of youths fought and died for the German war effort, even as defeat had become inevitable. On the 25th of September 1944, Sauckel was named leader of the Volkssturm forces in his district. 1 month later, in honor of his 50th birthday and for his contributions to the Reich, he was given a cash award of 250,000 Reichsmarks, an equivalent of almost 2.4 million United States dollars today. On the 10th of April 1945, only a day after declaring Weimar a fortress city and exhorting his Volkssturm forces to resist the approaching American army, Sauckel fled the city by car. The Second World War in Europe ended on the 8th of May 1945. 4 days later, Sauckel was arrested in Salzburg by members of the US Army Counterintelligence Corps. Justice finally caught up with Sauckel when he was tried at the Nuremberg trials, which were held against representatives of the defeated Nazi Germany. He was convicted of conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, planning, initiating and waging wars of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Robert H. Jackson, the chief United States prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, told Sauckel that he was the biggest and cruelest slave owner since the Egyptian pharaohs. Sauckel denied that the labor deployment was slave labor, or that it was common to deliberately work people to death through extermination by labor or to mistreat them. He argued that he was not responsible for these excesses in the administration of the program, which was only an economic process for supplying labor, and that he was constantly urging humane treatment. On the 1st of October 1946, the International Military Tribunal found Fritz Sauckel guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and sentenced him to death by hanging. Sauckel had not expected a death sentence and broke down in tears. He claimed that he had never been a cruel person and thought that translation errors of his statements were the cause. In addition, he could not comprehend that Albert Speer, the co-defendant Reich Minister for Armaments and War Production, at whose request Sauckel had supplied ever more new batches of forced laborers, only received a prison sentence. Sauckel was executed on the 16th of October 1946 by American Army Sergeant John C. Woods, who had no documented pre-war experience as a hangman. It is believed that he was deliberately bad at his job to make the 10 Nazi war criminals that he executed that day suffer, as they all died a long, agonizing death. The Nazis executed by Sergeant Woods fell from the gallows with a drop insufficient to snap their necks, resulting in their death by strangulation that in some cases lasted several minutes. When summoned for his last walk, Sauckel had refused to dress, so he went to the gallows wearing a sweater, with no coat, and looking wild-eyed. He cried, "I die an innocent man. My sentence is unjust. God protect Germany. May it live and one day become great again. God protect my family. I pay my respects to US soldiers and officers, but not to US Jews." Afterwards, he was hanged, and there was a loud groan under the gallows pit as the noose snapped tightly under the weight of the body. However, because the trapdoor was too small, it caused him painful head injuries, and as he fell from the gallows with insufficient force to snap his neck, his horrible convulsing lasted 14 long minutes before he died. He was 51 years old. After that, his corpse was cremated and the ashes scattered in the Wensbach, a small tributary of the river Isar. Sergeant Woods later not only insisted he had performed all executions correctly, but also stated he was very proud of his work. Joseph Malta, the US Army military policeman who held the noose as John C. Woods carried out the executions, said 50 years later, "It was a pleasure doing it. I'd do it all over again." There were no tears shed for Fritz Sauckel.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.